glass of milk, standing in between extinction in the cold and explosive radiating growth. So the warm blood flows through the large four-chambered heart.
Well, as I was growing up, I really didn't have a firm belief in anything. But I was very compelled to study sciences, like astronomy, geology, biology. Also experienced something that many people laugh at, and it opened my eyes to the world of spiritualism. That there are things that happen, they claim they're unexplainable, but they are explainable. As I grew up, I always said, if there's a God, I want proof.
Okay.
And I got my proof.
Okay. You got your proof.
I got my proof. And what it is not everyone is going to get the proof that they want.
Okay, but what was your experience, I guess?
Well, I had, normally alarm clocks go, they have a certain dee. Well, this alarm clock went dee.
Okay.
And I had visions since I was a child. I've had visions of things.
Wait, that was the miracle? The alarm clock making a different noise?
Do alarm clocks normally make that noise?
You can get them to make 151 different tunes.
Well, not this alarm clock in Germany that came out of Woolworth. Excuse me, I'm not advertising here.
Did it always make that sound?
No.
Or just one special time?
Just one special time.
And did you record it?
No, I didn't. My mind did, of course, because I'm telling you about it now.
You did say that you studied astronomy.
Yes.
And geology.
Mm-hmm.
You know that stuff like that doesn't count as evidence in science, don't you?
Well, because that's the problem with scientists. Not all of them are, but a lot of them are arrogant and seem to.
This is not about arrogance.
Well, right? Yeah, it is, because it's saying that this all occurred by accident. It's too perfect. If you study the atoms.
I'm talking about your alarm clock. Set aside the origin of the universe for a second. Just talking about the alarm clock.
Yes.
Right? It's not arrogance to say, gee, ma'am, your personal report that an alarm clock made a different noise once, and you have no evidence to support it. It's not arrogance to, look at that and go, oh, well, that's not evidence. Because it's an experience that, like I said, not everyone is going to experience what they want. They have to see for themselves. Isn't it how we learn the best? We learn from ourselves. And no, actually, no. There wouldn't be science if each of us could just learn everything on our own.
Of course, science is here to help us better understand how things work. And eventually, you should always get to the point, how did this come here? It's not an accident.
Well, let's talk about that question then.
What, the complexity of, say, for instance, the atom?
Yeah. Atoms are actually not complex.
Yes, they are. Have you studied? I have just read a great book from he's a scientist, and he wrote about the atom and this, when you have the core of the atom.
But the atom is made of a relatively finite number of elements, right?
That's right.
Of parts.
And don't they propel around the
I know they do. They're weird named things that act weirdly. That's true.
So what is that?
But it's not a lot of moving parts.
It is.
No, not compared to things made of atoms.
Compared to a car.
Not only of all the atoms, but all the moving parts in all those atoms.
How do you explain those moving parts then? Do you think that just came about by accident?
Well, how do you explain it?
How do I explain it?
Yeah.
Well, that is how God created it.
Okay.
And
my question for
atoms are the building blocks of everything that we have.
Is God complex?
Yes. More than our little minds could conceive.
More than our minds can conceive of atoms, and so he's more complex than atoms, right?
Of course.
And you just said that the fact that atoms are so complex is evidence that they couldn't have just come into being.
Exactly.
Right? They had to be created by something.
To be so complex.
So since God is so much more complex, he also had to be created.
No.
What created him? Why not?
We don't believe...
How come all of a sudden God is more complex than atoms, which you say have to have been created because they're so complex, but God doesn't have to be created, even though he's more complex? How does that make sense?
Because our mind has to conceive that God is God, and God was here before we all came into being.
Why? Maybe the atoms were here before we came into being.
I'm sorry?
Maybe the atoms were here first.
Well, yeah, that would be up to God. But
No.
You're trying to say that because atoms are so complicated, they had to have been created.
yes,
But if a thing has to have been created, if it's so complicated, then if God is more complicated, it's even more of an argument in favor of him having been created.
Well,
how come you get to shoehorn God in for free and not explain his origins?
because
how come?
This is what makes a person a believer, regardless. I don't care what religion. I don't.
What makes a person a believer
It's called
apparently
humiliation and submitting oneself to a power greater than us all.
But apparently, ma'am, what enables a person to be a believer is they hold completely irrational, contradictory concepts in their head.
It may be
time.
irrational to you because
It's not.
that
It's
is your
not.
thinking.
To me, it has nothing to do with me.
I used to think like you.
You made
sir,
an
and
argument.
One day
You made
it
an
all made
argument.
sense to me.
If a thing is so complicated, it had to have been created. Well, it's your argument. How come you get to cheat?
I'm not cheating.
You're cheating.
No,
You're
I'm not.
saying this is so complicated it had to have been created. This is more complicated, therefore it's not created?
Well, I understand why.
It makes no sense.
Why do you all have such a problem? Or were there some people in your life that had religious beliefs or foundations and they tried to push them on you and you didn't want to accept them? And you just kept running?
What does that have to do with it?
Atheism.
Because
How come you're attacking my life?
I'm not attacking you.
Yes, you are.
You're not here.
You're saying, ma'am, because I'm having a problem with your irrational argument, that therefore somebody must have hurt me with religion. That's nonsense.
Yeah.
Your argument is silly.
We're
Your
here.
argument
I'm going to tell you one
silly.
thing. When I discuss
here.
people with people, we all have opinions, right?
Okay.
And
We
it's
are
wrong
here
for
not
anybody
because-
to trounce on somebody else's opinion.
No, actually it's not. It is not wrong to trounce on opinions that are just silly.
For you, it's silly, but
not for me.
Yes,
there
for you.
There are basic principles of rational thinking, and they say things like, if you make an argument that a thing that is this complicated has to have been created, you can't then cheat and throw out your argument at the next step so that you let your God off the hook.
It's not
You
cheating.
can't
I
do
would never
that.
let God off the hook.
It has nothing to do with my perspective. That's irrational.
Well, you know what I tell
it's
everyone?
just
One day,
irrational.
we are all going to die. That's for certainty, right?
And?
Regardless what you believe, right?
And that sucks. And?
Why does it suck when we believe, as a believer of any religion, that there is life after death? There is.
If you're wrong,
I'm not wrong.
How do you know?
What evidence do you have?
that
What evidence that you have that you're right? How do you know that you're not wrong? The alarm clock doesn't cut it.
Well, my mother also has had. She was clinically dead, and she was resuscitated. And she described
and medical science is great.
Exactly, that's medical science that did that.
But God gave the doctors the ability to bring. See, that's a miracle.
No, actually, what happened is doctors, have been researching how the human body
I understand
works
this, but children
for a
don't
couple
know about
hundred
this
years.
research.
So I was an English major, and I had to take a science class. So, and by the way, my knowledge of science to this day goes no further than salt is salty. There, that's it. That's it. That's all I know.